Come on in, folks, and have a seat, and we'll continue the program. My name is Blaine Eubank, and I'm here to introduce our next guest speaker. His name is James Hendrson, and James is a fourth-generation Texas rancher raised in the hill country near Kerrville. He received an animal science degree from Texas A&M and did graduate work and coached the meat judging team at Texas Tech. His career has allowed him to experience all facets of the meat packing and processing industry. He has operated numerous plants in Texas, Colorado, and Uruguay. He and his wife, Mary Lou Bradley, operated three B3R country meats, which touched all segments of the beef industry: seed stock, cow-calf, feed yard, packer, and retail were part of their operation. Today, he and Mary Lou raise Angus and Charolais seed stock on their ranch near Childress, Texas. James has served on the board of directors of the Southwest Meat Association and Texas Cattle Feeders Association. Today, he serves on the board of directors of the American Angus Association, Certified Angus Beef, Angus Genetics Incorporated, currently serving as the chairman as well as the National Cattlemen's Beef Association Board. If you would, join me in welcoming James.
Thank you for that introduction, and you know, today's one of those days. Many years ago, when I used to think I was a rodeo hand, we always talked about that half at least of every rodeo was the draw. And today, you know, I grew up bad. To follow Dr. Farrell and Sarah Sanders, you know, is a pretty good task, but we'll see if we can fill that in. You know, I got the opportunity to shake hands with her a little bit ago and meet her, and I told her, I said, you know, I met your dad a couple of years ago at the NFR in Vegas, and she goes, I don't want to hear any more. So she has a great sense of humor. We're going to talk today about sustainability. And sustainability is one of those things that when Andy and I first started talking about this subject nearly 2 years ago now, and it was not quite on everybody's list of things to talk about. But I don't think you've heard any speaker get up here today that word didn't roll off of their lips somewhere in that process. And so everybody's talking about it. But I bet you if I went around the room, if we did one of those polls up here and asked 20 different people to define sustainability, I bet you I'd get 20 different answers as to what it is. And so we're going to try to talk about that today, but I think the first thing that we've got to do is define sustainability. And I'm going to tell you that the first definition, the first piece of things that you know about sustainability is that nothing is sustainable without a profit. Think about that for a minute. Now, anybody that you hear talk about sustainability, is that the first thing you hear from them? No. No, because we act like we're embarrassed to talk about profits. But I promise you, if you think about anything in life, I will say that nothing is sustainable without a profit. So we have to start there in defining that, and we have to somewhat be focused that that's part of what we're going to talk about with sustainability. I'd say the next thing in sustainability that we have to think about is doing more with less. Now, there's not a better champion in all of society than agriculturalists about doing more than less, with less. You know, look at the number of people that it takes today to feed the population of the United States. You know, at the turn of the century in 1900, it was almost 50% of the population that it took to feed the country. Our population is however many times larger than that today, and we're down to somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population to feed the country. But you know, if you think about it just on the cattle side of our business, in 1960, the average carcass weight was, I've got up here 640 pounds. It was probably closer to 600 pounds then, or at least it was in 1958. I've seen enough research on that it was around 600 pounds. And today, we say 850, but over the last few months, it's been closer to 900 pounds. That's per animal, carcass weight. You know, when you think about that, that's doing more with less. You know, and as we concentrate on those kinds of things, I told Mary Lou, my wife, the other day that when we sat down and kind of looked at the aftermath of raising bulls for our bull sale and so forth, this year we sold 100 more bulls than we did 10 years ago. They weighed 150 pounds more than they did 10 years ago, and we bought 3 loads less corn than we did 10 years ago. You know, that's the opportunity that we have from a sustainability standpoint, is to do more with less. And I think that's an important piece of what we need to look at. One of the things that my dad drilled into me as a young person was, no matter what you do, or no matter what you have, or no matter what your capabilities and resources are, you need to leave things better than you found them. You know, and I've taken that to heart every day when I get up. One of the first things I think about is, what can I do today to make things better than they were yesterday? Because when I leave this earth, you know, the only thing that is left is how much better did we make things, the lives of the people around us, our family, the opportunities of the ranch. And so you've got to leave things better than you found them. And one of the things that several people have told me in life, as I've had mentors in my life, they go, you can't just be a taker. You know, you've got to be a giver back in what you do. And so many times, we've all seen it in a lot of ranching operations where people are just takers. You know, and pretty soon there's no infrastructure on the ranch, there's no forage on the ranch, there may not be any water on the ranch. Folks, those things are not sustainable. You can't keep just taking from the land, and so we have to be able to leave things better than we found them. And the last piece of that is, it's about a lifestyle. We've talked about today lots of facets of lifestyle. You heard Dr. Farrell talk about, you know, people want to be able to pass on to the next generation the lifestyle that they enjoyed and create that opportunity for them, and how exciting that can be. And I will tell you that, you know, if I have any regrets at all about what I've been able to do and accomplish in this life, it's that I'm not 30 years old today. Because, you know, I think where the opportunities are and what we can do and where we can go in agriculture and the lifestyle opportunities that it creates for all of us, just, you know, I'm more excited today than I've ever been in my life about what we can do and where we can go and how we can accomplish it. And so if we start to wrap around a definition that says first thing is profitability, second thing is we probably have to do more with less. The third thing is we need to create an environment where we leave things better than we found them, and then we have a lifestyle that somebody wants, you know, maybe those things are possibly sustainable. So how do we begin to drill down now to talk about those things in a little more detail of what you do? And you know, sometimes my dad and I didn't see things eye to eye, and I thought it was a little bit silly the way that he phrased things, but you know, the older I get, the more I appreciate a lot of those things. But he always said, you know, to accomplish anything in life, you have to plan your work and work your plan. He always said, anytime you start out on a journey in life, if you'll stick a stick in the ground and every so often you look at that stick, as long as you're looking back at it, you're doing okay. You know, as long as it's not still out in front of you, you're making progress and you're making it work. And so, you know, as that says up there, if you don't have a vision for where you want to go, you know, a road will get you somewhere. But I say that you have to start out with a plan, and to do that, you need a vision first, and then you need some goals that you're going to have to set out in life. And you know, to create those goals sometimes take a long time. I know at the ranch, we started with a vision that we wanted to get water no more than a half a mile anywhere on the ranch. You know, and we started down that path thinking that it would take us maybe 10 or 15 years to get there. It took 20. You know, and we drilled a few dry holes, and we've had a few broken pipelines, and we've had all of those kinds of things. But, you know, one of those goals was to make sure that we had a ranch that there was not more than a half a mile to water anywhere on the ranch, so we could begin to utilize more of the ranch, more of the forage, keeping cattle where they don't have to pass through that. And so sometimes they're short goals, and sometimes they may be 20-year goals and how you do it. But it's important to have those goals and to be able to do that. The next thing that comes up, and you've heard this topic quite a bit in the last session with Sarah, a lot of questions brought up about this, but education is a key part. And one of the things that I tell all of our co-workers at the plant, all of our team members there, and anybody that comes to the ranch is that it's my quest to make sure I learn something new every day. You know, education doesn't end when we get out of high school or college or graduate school or whatever it is. That's the reason all of you are here today, you know, because you're interested in education. And it's important that we continue the education because, you know, I've had the fortune in life to visit literally thousands of ranching operations across the country with a lot of different functions and different things. And I don't think I've ever been on one that I didn't learn something, you know, because everybody has good ideas of ways to do things and how to do them. And, you know, I don't think we've ever had a co-worker at the plant, at any of the meat plants or at the ranch that I didn't learn something from them, you know, because they all contribute to that education. And so I think it's important every day for all of us to say, what can we do that continues to educate us on our quest and our journey to make things sustainable. The next thing that's required is capital. We all know that this is a very capital-intensive business, and it takes capital to be able to get where we need to and how we need to go it. But you know, you really need a plan, and you need to work that plan around the capital requirements that you need. because, it's not a bad thing to have debt, but it probably is a bad thing to become a slave to debt. And so, making sure that you have capital around you, and sometimes that capital's not necessarily cash. In the cow business, our greatest capital may be our grass. If we don't have any, we can't raise cattle, and it's not sustainable to do that. And so how do we create and manage capital, and how do we work through those kinds of situations? We also have to have a lot of relationships. None of us do this on our own in what we do and how. And, it's like a guy told me one time, he said, if you see a turtle on top of a fence post, he said, one thing you can be assured of, he didn't get there by himself. And so, that's kind of how we are in life. None of us get to where we are today by ourselves. We have a lot of people that help us to get there. And those relationships are extremely important. And Andy and I have had a relationship for a long, long time, going back long before he was in Hemphill County and an extension agent up here. And it's those kinds of relationships that carry you through life and accomplish those things. The other thing that you heard Sarah say a little bit ago was how important it is for leadership. And leadership takes on all kinds of forms, folks. We're not all cut out to be press secretary for Donald Trump. I know I wouldn't, because there'd have been a fist fight in the press room every day over that. But we have to be able to provide leadership, whether it's in our local church, school board, PTA, a 4-H group, whatever it is. Leadership is a key part of sustainability, because if we don't care enough to help others and to help lead others, then what we do will die with us. And that's, we heard a lot about those things from Dr. Farrell this morning, but being able to provide some leadership back is extremely important. So now that we've kind of decided, okay, if we're going to plan our work and work our plan, we've got to have a vision, we've got to have goals and an education. We've probably got to have some capital and resources. We need to have relationships of people that can help us in life, and then we need to be able to create some leadership. It's probably pretty important, if we're going to sustain ranching, to understand maybe some of the functions and key metrics of ranching and what that is. And this is a term that I learned a couple of years ago when I was on the Angus Genetics Board, and we had a meeting in College Station, and went over to A&M, and Dr. Lamb was there, and one of the presentations was all about upscaling protein. I'd not heard that term before then, but that is the core of our business, folks. That is what ranching is all about, is that we are in the business of upscaling protein. We're able to take the sunlight that God provides us every day, that turns into a forage product that we can't utilize, but we can put a ruminant animal on that forage and turn it into the most dense, delicious, nutritious product in the world. That's what we do. That's what we get the opportunity to do. And that cycle is what sustainability is all about. You hear a lot that ranchers were the first conservationists. They were the first in the sustainable line. But that's because these things are sustainable if we concentrate on what we're doing. Then we need to know something about measurements. And one of the things that I always do when I'm talking to cattle producers is I always ask the question, and I want to show of hands, how many of you own a scale? You know, there's about 20% of you in here that raised your hand. I want to ask you something. In a business where all of your revenue is generated on a per pound basis, how is it you don't own a scale? Can you imagine going in a Walmart store that doesn't have a cash register? You know, Sam Walton didn't dare build one of those kind of stores that he didn't have a cash register. And I would venture to say that if you're in the ranching business and your revenue comes on a per pound basis, you probably ought to own a scale. Because that's that measure that becomes really important to us, okay, is pounds. Now, those pounds may mean a lot of different things, and we can use them in lots of places, but that's kind of the first place that we need to look. Then if we go to talking about some measures that we don't hear very often in our business, but how many acres does it take per cow? You know, and one of the things that from the extension guys, we will talk about how many acres per cow or those kinds of things. And, you know, when the work was done on an animal unit, the average cow was 1,000 pounds. How many 1,000-pound cows do you guys have on your outfits? Not very many. You know, so if we've got 1,300 or 1,400-pound cows, that's 1.3, 1.4 animal units, folks, because just because they are a cow doesn't mean they have the same nutrition requirements. A 1,000-pound cow and a 1,400-pound cow don't. They have different nutrition requirements and different resource needs. And so it's really important that we understand that figuring acres per cow probably really needs to be acres per animal unit, and animal units need to be figured on that 1,000-pound basis because that's traditionally and historically what we've done, and that's a way to standardize those things and how we do that. The next one that I'll ask you about is, how many of you know on top of your head how many calves that you've weaned to cows exposed? I see a few hands, you know, but most people don't figure that. And why don't they? Because it takes 18 months of records to do that, and we all tend to keep records on an annual basis, and then we move to the next year, you know. But that life cycle, the gestation period of a cow, and by the time you get to market that calf, you're about 18 months across there, and it becomes really important. And you know, to me, that's probably the most important metric that we have in the business. And does anybody know what that number was 35 years ago? Across SPA data 35 years ago, that number was 78%. Does anybody know what that number on SPA data is today? 78%. 35 years as an industry, and we're exactly where we were 35 years ago. You think that's sustainable? Is that doing more with less? You know, when we kind of figured this out at the ranch, we sat down and started working on, okay, what can we do to increase calves weaned to cows exposed? Because, see, that cost is there no matter what. And we raised that percentage, 8 percentage points. For us, that's 40 calves with the same cost. That's doing more with less. that becomes really sustainable. Our overhead didn't go up in that process. We focused on getting calves weaned to cows exposed. That requires looking at fertility of the cows and being pretty ruthless with those that aren't bred. They're gone. Making sure that cow has a place where she can calve, hopefully as protected from predators and weather and those kinds of things as we can possibly accommodate. Trying to make sure that calf is healthy and can get up and nurse and get colostrum and all the things that you hear about. And then making sure that it stays healthy enough to get to weaning through all that process. Now, that becomes really, really important, but there's probably not anything that we can do. We can talk about all of the other things that go into premiums and those kinds of things, but the first thing that they taught us in Animal Science 101 when I was at A&M was that the two most profitable things in the cattle business were fertility and longevity. And we love to talk about a lot of other things than that today, but those two things are still, when I run the numbers, are still the two most important things in our business to make it sustainable. And so that calves weaned to cows exposed is a pretty big deal. That next one is something that we do religiously. Is next week we'll start preg checking cows on our outfit, and we'll take 3 days next week to do that. And when we preg check those cows, we weigh every cow. And we take 205-day weights on our calves same day. And then it's a pretty easy calculation. And we do that every year to know what percent of a cow's body weight does she wean. When we started doing that, we were pretty adamant that a cow needed to wean 50% of her body weight. And there were an awful lot of cows that didn't do that. And when I see a lot of these cows today that weigh 14, 15, 16, get up in the Dakotas and Nebraska, and maybe it's 2,000 or 2,200 pound cows that are up there. How many of those cows come anywhere close to weaning 50% of their body weight? Not very many. But we've been able to raise ours to 58% of their body weight in what they wean. Huge difference in the efficiency of those cows and what they do and how they do it. And so that becomes very important. And then we need to look at how many pounds do we wean per acre, and why would that be important? One of the things that you learn in math is that you have to have common denominators, right? And it's really interesting to me that in our business we do things like, for everything downstream from a cow-calf operation, we figure all of our cost on a per head basis and all of our revenues on a per pound basis. Does that make sense? How do you compare those? If your costs are on a per head basis, your pounds are on a per pound basis. Your revenues on a per pound basis. How do you compare those kinds of events and so forth? We have to put things on the same basis, because like if your costs are on a per head basis and your revenues on a per pound basis, the incentives are always to what? Make them bigger. We wonder why cows keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's because our measurements tell us to do that. Okay, that's the signals that come back in the system. How long is that sustainable? How long can we do that to keep making them bigger and bigger and bigger? And it's the same thing with our land resource. We figure all of our cost on a per acre basis, don't we? We talk about any of the inputs that we do, fertilizer, spraying, buying the land, any of those kinds of things are on a per acre basis. And if our revenue is on a per animal basis or on a per pound basis, and we don't convert them to the same basis, we can't really get our hands around whether we're making that profit that where we started in this conversation. And so it's really important to understand those measurements in ranching, because that's kind of that next key part. You know, then we need to get down to some of these functions of how we put these things together. Now, we've talked about kind of the definition, and we've talked about kind of the vision and the overarching part of that. We've talked about how we measure some of this stuff, but now how do we begin to maximize some of these things? How do we take those finite resources that we have and really begin to maximize? You've heard me talk about the things that we try to do in that regard. And I'll say the first one of those is genetics. And having served the last couple of years as chairman of the Angus Genetics Board, one, I learned way more about genetics than I ever thought I would in my lifetime. Because if you saw my genetics grade in college, you would wonder how I ever deserved to serve as chairman of Angus Genetics. But that's going to be our future. That's going to be how we go forward in this business. You know, and when we talk about education and those kinds of things, you know, how many of you in this room understand the term low-pass sequencing? Better get used to it. You know, that's kind of the next phase of this business of where we're going, is something like low-pass sequencing. You know, I think it cost, Andy, you probably know this number, what did it cost to sequence the first bovine genome?
Thousands.
Actually, I think it was around 100 million.
Really?
To sequence the bovine genome. Today, we can do a low-pass sequence test for $45. Think about that. That's in 20 years, folks, of what we've done. Now, why would low-pass sequencing be something important? Because there's 1 billion markers in the bovine genome. But 800 million of them are identical in all bovines. There's only 200 million markers that are unique in bovines. Okay? 200 million markers hold every answer for the differences in beef cattle. Think about that for a minute. And we can do a low-pass sequencing test today for $45. Wow. What are the opportunities on a go-forward basis? What does the future hold for us from a genetic standpoint? Dr. Lamb and I had the conversation this morning that one of the challenges when I left the Angus board a few months ago that I challenged the board with was I said, you guys need to figure out what's going to happen when the first guy walks in here with a gene-edited Angus animal that's white. Are you going to register it? Is it part of the association? You know? Because it'll happen before long, I can tell you. We can edit genes into these animals to take the horns off of them, to change the coat color, to add more marbling, to do the functions to make them more efficient. That's all coming, folks, and we're going to need to deal with it and understand how to use it and how to embrace it. And that's going to become important functions of our business, and it's going to very much increase the sustainability of what we do, because we're going to be able to maximize resources as we go forward. You know, one of my daughters is a purchasing agent for HEB, and every seems like every few days here lately, she's been calling me and telling me how difficult it is to find soy oil or cottonseed oil or any of the corn oil or canola oil or any of those kinds of oils. And when you start asking why, she's going, well, she called me the day before yesterday and she goes, you realize that Phillips 66 and Love's Truck Stop today bought the biggest biggest soy oil manufacturer in the U.S. so that it could go into biodiesel. And she's going, those of us in the food business, we need food grade products like that. Now we've got to compete with Phillips Petroleum for those soy oil products. We're going to have to do more with less, and genetics is a real key to that. The next one of those things that we're going to have to learn how to maximize is water. And I've said for 40 years that our next civil war in this country would be fought over water. And I think we're probably closer to that every day. If you look at what the folks out in California have to deal with from a water standpoint, and now you compound it with the kind of drought that they're in out there and the politics that they're having to deal with, I don't know how long agriculture survives in California. And we're all going to be dealing with those kinds of resources. But nothing in life happens without water. It's absolutely the most precious resource that we have. And so if we don't figure out the function of water and how to catch it and utilize it and maintain it, get the most function out of it that we possibly can, then I think we're probably missing the boat of opportunities that we have going forward. One of the pictures that you may have seen up there earlier showed a water trough with some little black balls in there. And Minnie Lou challenged all of us because part of what we have on the ranch is rural water supply water, and it's expensive. And we've got big tubs so that you can supply a lot of cattle at one time. And, we got to trying to figure out how much evaporation do we lose in those tubs. And so, Minnie Lou will be 90 this year, but she's always walking in our office every day with something that she's read or brought up or something that is, have you thought about this? Have you looked at that? Have you seen this? Those aqua balls were one of those things that Minnie Lou said, I want to try this because I think it'll work. And so we put a number of those water troughs around the ranch, and I'll tell you that, we cut the water meter off to some of those 16 to 20 foot tubs this last fall. And when we started getting things ready for spring the other day around those troughs, every one of them were still full. So whatever evaporation rate we lost out of there because of those aqua balls was replaced by rainfall into those tubs. Big deal. Big deal to be able to not lose that kind of water to evaporation in what we do and how we do it. And so water is a big piece of it. The next thing that you've already heard me talk a lot about, we're in the business of converting grass to a human consumable form of protein. And so forage becomes a key part of our business. That is really what we are. We're grass farmers, and we harvest it with cattle. So forage becomes extremely important. And how many of you know how your cows utilize forage? How efficient are they on forage? How they gain on forage? We all love to go to the coffee shop and brag about how our calves did in the feed yard, because we get that measure from the feed yard. We know what they gained, and if you know the math fairly well, you can do the calculations of conversions and those kinds of things. But Do we measure any of that on forage? Oh, it's just grass out there. Folks, that is our crop. It's that grass. You know, and so we spend a lot of time trying to identify those things. We do a grass gain test on all of our bulls. Because if that's our primary resource, wouldn't we want to know how they perform on grass? You know, that becomes a really key part of understanding what we're doing and how we're doing it. Because if we're not going to be feeding them in a bunk, and very few of us in Texas do that, you know, understanding what we can do with those resources of forage become extremely important to us. And the last thing that I put up there was, you know, something that we fight year in and year out. Manny Lou's fought that every year she's been on that ranch down there of her life is weeds and brush. You know, and I've been told that the junipers that cover up the north part of the ranch use 30 gallons of water a day. Think about that. What could we do with that 30 gallons of water a day besides having a juniper tree that's not functioning for much of anything else? If we were able to get those gone off the property. And so, being able to understand those functions of what we need to do to become more sustainable is a key component of that. And then I'm going to kind of wrap it up here with saying that one of the things that we tend to do in this business is talk about least cost. And is there a difference in least cost and best cost in what we do and how we do it? You know, I've talked to a lot of groups and a lot of different organizations, and, you know, truly within any industry, there's only one least cost operator. You know, Walmart doesn't even claim to be the least cost operator in their business anymore, because there's others that are actually less cost than they are. And if you're not the least cost operator, then you better figure out how to do it from a best cost standpoint. Spending money that makes you money. You know, it was big conversations at the ranch when we talked about adding pivots. You know, that was one of those things. Actually, we didn't try to eat the elephant all in one bite. We brought in some New Zealand pod system for a period of time and tried to irrigate some grass with that and try to figure out, you know, could that really help our productivity on the ranch? Could we grow the grass with the water that we had, because it's not very good? And, you know, would that work, and how would it work? But then when we finally took that leap and put that pivot out there, we pretty quickly decided that one wasn't enough. We had to have two. You know, but it's allowed us to increase or decrease the number of acres that it takes on our operation to run an animal unit. You know, and it's money that we spent that has given money back to us. And so when we begin to look at this whole concept of sustainability, I've struggled with this for 10 years or so now, and you know, and I've been in and around parts of the U.S. Roundtable on Sustainability, the Global Roundtable on Sustainability, and you get all of these groups that boy, they want to tell you that, and all these big corporations today, McDonald's, and you know, you go down the list of all of them, and they're going to tell you that they're going to be fully sustainable in 2030 or 2040 or pick a number. You know, that they're only going to buy from vendors that are proving themselves to be sustainable in all that they do. But when you go sit with those groups and ask them to give you a definition of sustainability, they'll give you all kinds of warm and fuzzy green terms of what sustainability is. But it's kind of like a guy that was from Montana one time, and he was down when we had the meat plant, and we were going back to the airport, and he said, you know, it's pretty easy to get bragging rights at the coffee shop. He said, just wean your calves 2 weeks later than everybody else. So what you're asking us to do is work. You know, and that's part of what we get the opportunity to do every day. You know, is we get the opportunity to get up and work for what we do. We get the opportunity to create an environment, and our hope is that someone will want to follow behind us for that opportunity. You know, and we need to understand that in a ranching operation, too many times we think that it's like downstream operations where they're margin operations. You know, and a margin operation by definition depletes assets. And everything downstream of a cow-calf operation is a margin operation. It doesn't matter whether it's a stocker or a feeder or a packing house or a distribution center or a retail grocery store or a restaurant. Those are all margin operations, every one of them. And by definition, they deplete assets. But you heard Dr. Farrell talk a little bit earlier about ranching being an asset management business. Not very many people use that term. It's not a margin business. It's an asset management business, and you have two assets. You have the land, and you have the harvest equipment called cattle off of that land. And our job in sustainability is to appreciate the value of both of those. And we've got to be able to understand the definition of those things and what's required of us to do the kinds of things that are necessary to be sustainable. So I appreciate you. Andy, you weren't in here. I know you were tied up a little bit earlier. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and be part of this. And I think maybe we have time for a couple of questions if somebody would like to ask one.
So James, I want to ask you the first question, and I'm a little bit more loaded about Bradley 3 Ranch than most people because I've known Minnie Lou my whole life. But if I remember right, Minnie Lou telling me that she and Bill started weighing the cows, I think it was 1962, if I remember right. How has that approach that you spoke about that they implemented so many years ago allowed Bradley 3 Ranch to develop a cow herd that fits the kind of land and country that y'all have to ranch in?
Andy's question is basically how did we get to where we are, you know, from those kinds of things. And you know, we all want to think about how did we get where we are. But Bill and Minnie Lou, you know, that was a pretty tough environment when they moved out there in 1955, because there was no telephone, there was no TV, there was actually no water. They had somebody to haul it around to dump in cisterns, you know, kind of a thing, because you couldn't drink it. And you know, the one thing that I will say, and I've avoided saying this to this point, but if you come to the ranch today, from the original ranch that they bought, it's about 5 times the acreage that it was that they bought. And everything on that ranch has been paid for by those cows. And so, you know, when you talk about sustainability, it's all about measuring all of those kinds of things, sitting down and having lots of conversation with people way smarter than us about how do you take those measurements in that environment, maximize what you have, and turn that back into money that we can plow back into what we're doing to generate more and to create more opportunity. And so you know, Mary Lou and I have had the good fortune to have great teachers in what we're doing, and you know, hopefully we're smart enough from an education standpoint to take advantage of that, but that's that cycle of what we do and how. So thank you for that. Other questions? If not, well, thank you. Yes, sir.
How do you rotate your pastures?
He's
How do you rotate your pastures, and how do you use any polywire?
use any
Polywire?
polywire. We don't use any polywire. We do have some electric fence in some places. He asked the question of how do we rotate pastures and do we utilize electric fence in some of that. We do some things probably somewhat unique, but because we'll be weaning here in the next few weeks all of our calves, it's a pretty good opportunity for us to take the cow herd then that's bred and consolidate those cows in one big group basically and rotate through some improved grasses that we have on the south end of the ranch, mostly old world blue stem, but there would be some native grasses and some other grasses in there that we utilize. And we'll rotate around those paddocks or pastures depending on acreage and rainfall and, you know, all of those kinds of things. We basically let the grass tell us, you know, how fast we need to rotate those cows through that in the summertime. But we have enough of those paddocks that we won't ever be back around on a paddock quicker than 45 days from when we left it. And so it's had time to regenerate and regrow. And we're off of all of the native pastures the entire growing season. And what that's allowed us to do is allowed us to heal a lot of riparian areas, a lot of the draws and creeks and so forth, and we get to grow that grass and stockpile it for the entire winter time for us, and that is our forage resource then for those cow-calf pairs that go back into those pastures. And it's been a wonderful cycle for us to be able to utilize that. We do have those 2 grass pivots that we also utilize for the bulls that we raise and our replacement heifers and our bred heifers on those grass pivots that we're able to rotate around the grass on them. We have those pivots cut into quarters with electric fence, and we can rotate around those quarters and graze them. And so, but we're constantly trying to let the grass tell us when we need to move cattle. Thank you again for the opportunity, Andy. Appreciate it.